So on this channel, we have often spoke about crazy Marvel fans being really butthurt about the latest controversy, unusually always focusing on people like Brie Larson or talking about how Disney have gone woke. But this one is a bit different. This time, Turkish Marvel fans are really mad that the new show Moon Knight, starring Oscar Isaac, acknowledges the Armenian Genocide. Now, as we're going to get into in the video, it doesn't go on a big tangent talking about like why the Armenian Genocide was specifically bad, but if you know like your geopolitics, you will know that recognizing the Armenian Genocide is not something a lot of the most powerful countries in the world do for various reasons. The UK doesn't recognize it, Israel doesn't recognize it, the US has historically not recognized it until about a year ago under Joe Biden. So today what I wanted to do is talk about this Moon Knight Armenian Genocide drama. Then I want to talk about what the Armenian Genocide actually was, more like in a historical context, because I know a fair bit about Turkish history and a bit about Armenian history, not as much as Turkish history, but I want to talk about that today. Then I want to talk about other films, weirdly also involving Oscar Isaac, which also discuss the Armenian Genocide, and films that push revisionist history about the genocide, like many in Turkey do, because a lot of them actually deny it's technically a genocide. It seems a weird thing to do. They say it's like a massive killing, but then that actually leads to loads of genocide denial in Turkey itself. And then I want to end it on how these powerful nations that are often guilty of genocide themselves either do or don't recognize the Armenian Genocide based on certain geopolitical factors. So before we go any further, videos like this, of course, will not be monetized because we are going into very controversial and pretty gruesome territory in this video. So if you want to support my work going forward, please consider becoming a patron. Also, follow me on social media at the Kavernacle on Twitter, on Instagram. Please like the video and comment your thoughts to help it in the algorithm and help support my channel. Also consider subscribing to my second channel, the Kavernacle Extra, and consider joining our community on my subreddit. Also, one more thing, this is the last video I am filming in Spain. I am actually returning home to the UK on Thursday. I've been getting a lot of comments recently, bizarrely, not at the start of me coming here. Where are the chocolate oranges in the background? Why didn't you bring the chocolate oranges with you? I actually had the goal of adding 3 more chocolate oranges to the pyramid by the time I got home. We're gonna fall short. I think I'm gonna add 2 more when I get home, because we need about like another 2,500 subscribers to get the 3rd one. But overall, I've really enjoyed my time here. If you are a patron, I have written a very long, detailed community post about, what I've enjoyed about my time here, what I've thought about my channel during my time here, the various Spanish cities I visited and everything like that. So if you're interested and you're a patron or you're going to become a patron, I have outlined everything there. And actually, I'm going to do a special stream this weekend. I think probably Sunday, it could be Saturday, and we're going to stream for about like 3 hours. I'm probably going to play like Mario Kart with subscribers and everything like that. If you're interested, just maybe put notifications on for my live streams, my video uploads, and come join the stream. It should be a lot of fun, and in some ways I'm happy to be going back. In a lot of ways I'm actually very depressed to be going back. The state of UK politics is what really depresses me. Overall, I'm really happy I've done this. I greatly enjoyed my time in Spain. I really like the country. Shame that the weather was goddamn awful over the last month, and there were like numerous sandstorms blowing in from the Sahara. So now let's get into the video proper. Now, anyone who has spent enough time online knows some of the worst people to get into arguments with are Indian nationalists, Israeli nationalists, and Turkish nationalists, because these people can be absolutely unrelenting in their Twitter arguments. You see this a lot when tension flares up between like Pakistan and India, or India and China, or various situations in the Middle East. You know how Turkish nationalist Twitter users can be. So this news is probably not surprising, but now let's go into the Moon Knight news specifically. So Narayan Lu reporting, Moon Knight gets review bombs for acknowledging Armenian genocide. Disney Plus's Moon Knight series, which only recently saw the release of its premiere episode, has been the subject of review bombing on IMDb, owing to the fact that the show acknowledged a historical event that the nation of Turkey has consistently denied, the Armenian genocide, alongside seemingly legitimate one-star reviews on the site, several viewers have criticised the mention of the Armenian Genocide, insisting that no such event took place and that the show is serving as propaganda, some going so far as to call the show racist. The scene in question featured a confrontation between Arthur Harrow, played by Ethan Hawke, and Stephen Grant, played by Oscar Isaac, at the museum he works at. Harrow tells Grant of the Egyptian god Amit, who was able to judge a life in its entirety for crimes a person had yet to commit. In his speech, Harrow claims that if Amit had not been betrayed by the gods and avatars, she could have prevented horrors such as Hitler, the Armenian Genocide, Pol Pot, and more. I'm not going to play the clip as much as I want to. You can easily find it on Twitter by just typing in like Armenian Genocide, Moon Knight. But honestly, it's just a guy saying it, and people speculated maybe Oscar Isaac had the other character say this because he did work on another film to do with the Armenian Genocide. But honestly, I don't really know. But again, the mere recognition of this has sent these people into frenzy. But just the article going forward a bit further, the Turkish government's official stance is that the Armenian Genocide, which took place during World War I between 1915 and 1917, is largely fabricated. It should be noted that the genocide, which was committed by the Ottoman Empire, now the Republic of Turkey, was well documented. Mentions of the genocide are censored in Turkey, and several countries have refused to acknowledge it in the past in order to maintain a positive relationship with the country. It's understood that during World War I, the Ottoman Empire saw between 800,000 to 1.2 million Armenian people sent into the Syrian desert, where they were placed into concentration camps and subjected to torture, abuse, and killings. Furthermore, approximately 200,000 Christian Armenians were forcibly converted to Islam and brought into Muslim households for integration. While the Turkish government does not outright deny the historical event, it does deny that a genocide took place, stating that only the Ottoman Empire committed atrocities. It's often mentioned that Polish Jewish lawyer Raphael Lemkin, who coined the term genocide and initiated the Genocide Convention in 1948, was prompted to do so after because of the Armenian Genocide and the absence of international laws at the time that could be used to prosecute those behind the tragedy. There are currently 31 countries, including the US, that officially recognize the genocide. So here are some of the reviews left. I've screen capped them. Warning, spoilers, woke bullcrap, and the moron of an actor needs to stop talking about politics if he doesn't know what he is talking about. When will these idiots learn that they aren't politicians? Their job is to entertain, not be political. Marvel is being an instrument of lies. I was watching Marvel's Moon Knight with great excitement, but when he mentioned the so-called genocide, I closed the show right that second. Marvel is being an instrument of lies of what you have done, and you should immediately apologize to the Turkish people. Pumping false historical information. Nowadays, US film industries like to pump false historical information about the fake Armenian genocide. Bullshit. Obviously, Armenian lobby works hard and influence these false information all over the world. The title is another piece of lobbying effort, nothing more. Strong thumbs down. Political false information. A single sentence in the series screwed them all up. These guys are so sensitive. Do not unknowingly add political issues to the script. Don't get into nonsense to increase your audience. Do not be worse off than politicians in political matters. Leave the history to the historians. Marvel needs to entertain, not blame nations for events that didn't happen. There is no Armenian genocide. Our government invite Armenian government for showing all documents to the public, but they didn't want it because when they do it, their brutality will appear. Everyone will know what they did, Turkish and Kurdish villages. Stop telling lies. There is no Armenian genocide. You historical ignorance. Are you illiterate or anything else? Don't you read a historical document? We are really tired of your lies and ignorance. This is really enough. So again, Turkish nationalists are really fragile. Now, I was actually watching some TYT before I went on because, of course, they've been in controversies because of the name of the network. Now, it was just a video where Anna, obviously Armenian herself, and Cenk were talking about this stuff because Cenk obviously grew up in Turkey and he actually wrote something, I think, when he was at college, denying the Armenian genocide. And he talks about it here, and he also talks about why Turks get so fragile about people talking about it.
Now let's get to the Armenian genocide. So, did I write things about that when I was younger? Yes, so that part is true. So I did deny it earlier. I wrote in a column when I was in college about that. And so obviously a long time ago. Well, what's my position? I think I've stated it clearly a number of times, but I'm gonna state it one more time here, okay? The Armenian genocide happened. It existed, it's true, okay? I don't know how I could be any clearer than that. So I know that some Turkish folks grew up believing in things that were taught to them, whether it was in Turkey or through other means, and I know because I lived that, right? I'm a Turkish American, and I grew up believing the things that I was taught. I looking back on it, some of it is absolutely absurd. And to my Turkish friends who are deeply offended by all of this, and yes, and if you live in America, you can say, oh, it's their fault and they're terrible, etc. But they're taught a certain thing, and so when they're challenged on this, they say, no, well, it was a civil war, it was and it was just massacres. Really? That's what you're gonna say? Look, the Turkish government has no leg to stand on. They say this insults our Turkishness. Who cares? That's not a thing. It's criminal in Turkey, but it's absurd. And saying that there's the country, in this case, it's not the Republic of Turkey, it was the old Ottoman Empire, right? Did something wrong, doesn't mean every person is guilty. I have plenty of Turkish friends here and back at home in Turkey that object to this, of course, right? Because of their Turkish pride, etc., right? And so one, I just told you all the reasons why it doesn't make sense. But two, they say, oh, they're targeting us because we're Turkish and they want to spread these things about Turks and Muslims. First, I love you guys, but don't flatter yourself. Like, only from your Turkish perspective do you think, oh, they're obsessed with taking us down a notch. They're not obsessed with you at all. They never think about you, except for situations like this. Yeah. But more importantly, they say, oh, but they're gonna teach all the children to hate Turks. Okay, I get it, that's a concern, right? But guys, we also teach them about the Holocaust, and that's Germans, and we teach them about the rape of Nanking, and that's the Japanese. We're not telling them to hate Germans or Japanese people.
So yeah, a lot of Turks think like if you mention this, you're trying to like solely blame them for like all the evils in the world. You're actually just trying to attack Turkish people, and you hate Turkish people. That's why you bring up the Armenian Genocide, which of course a lot of them even deny in the first place. Now I read out a short little overview of the Armenian Genocide for you there. And I've got like some small excerpts from Wikipedia, I'm going to be honest here, about some points of it that I just want to read off. A lot of what I'm going to talk about is actually just off the top of my head, so I'm not going to read off a script, but I think some points I need to clarify a bit better about what happened and the legacy and everything like that. Now, the Ottoman Empire was one of the biggest and longest empires in modern human history and didn't even end until after the First World War. Very, very long history. And of course, the Turks' history in the Middle East goes back to about, I think, 900 AD with the Seljuk Turks. Now, the Seljuk Turks are not exactly the same as the Ottoman Turks, who of course created the Ottoman Empire, but the Seljuk Turks were the primary opponents of the original First Crusade and their Byzantine allies. And what's actually pretty funny is that a lot of Arabs actually thought the Turks were heretics because they weren't Arabs. They were just Asian Turks who'd come down to the Middle East and converted. Now, with the Ottoman Empire, I guess for a lot of people, there's kind of this vision of it being completely dominated just by Turks or just by Muslims. But like many empires throughout human history, like the Roman Empire, it was very, very multicultural. Now, I'm not going to pretend Armenians were treated equally in that society, but Armenians were a big part of the Ottoman Empire. And although Armenians with other groups like Jewish people and Greek Christians as well were treated as second-class citizens, they were often in positions of government. They were in the elite of Constantinople, obviously called Istanbul by the Turks, and generally were pretty tolerated by the Ottoman Empire throughout its existence. The Ottoman Empire, of course, owned Greece itself and did often make these groups second-class citizens behind the Muslims and the Turkish Muslims. It's important to know this stuff because of the Turkish nationalism that resulted in the genocide. Now, Armenia and the old Christian kingdom of Armenia was always caught between warring powers. It didn't really stand a chance in terms of its geography because in the 400s and 500s, it was caught between Persia and it was caught between the Roman Empire, and then later on was caught between Turkish empires, Arab empires, and Persian empires as well, constantly invaded and made to be subjugated by various empires throughout medieval history. And when the Ottoman Empire came to dominate the region, they fell under their thumb as well. So I put that in context for you because what happened in the Ottoman Empire's decline, which started massively in about, I guess, the 1820s and certainly towards the 1880s, is that there was a new form of nationalism rising in the Ottoman Empire, and that was this Turkish nationalism specifically. Now, like I said, Ottoman Empire, very multicultural, various different Arab groups and Kurds and Bedouin and all these different Muslim groups had various positions of power in the Ottoman Empire. But with the Ottoman Empire declining, losing more wars, the Turkish nationalism in the Ottoman Empire really got very strong, and they started to really focus on creating a Turkish state. And when they lost things like the Balkan Wars and constantly lost wars to Russia, they would often blame the Armenians, and they would always view Armenians in this period with suspicion and believed it was likely they would start a massive uprising or maybe even break away their territories from the Ottoman Empire and join Russia. Now, between like the 1870s and before World War I, there were massacres of Armenians who were blamed for losses in wars against Russia and treated with suspicion, like I said. They also had their land often confiscated by the Ottoman government and given to Muslim refugees, especially fleeing from the Balkans. And as the hostility with groups like Russia and the newly independent Greece, they constantly targeted Orthodox Christians, Greek, Armenian, and others in the region because, again, like I said, they viewed them with suspicion and viewed them as potential collaborators with the Greeks and with the Russians. Now, in World War I, they started conscripting Armenians into the armed forces, and very early into World War I, it's obviously when the genocide began, and of course, again, the Ottomans were fighting the Russians. I just wanted to read a bit about the aims of the genocide. So during World War I, the Committee of Union and Progress, whose central goal was to preserve the Ottoman Empire, came to identify Armenian civilians as an existential threat. CUP leaders had Armenians, including women and children, collectively guilty for betraying the empire, a belief that was crucial to deciding on genocide in early 1915. At the same time, the war provided an opportunity to enact, in Talat's words, the definitive solution to the Armenian question. The CUP wrongly believed that the Russian Empire sought to annex eastern Anatolia, where a lot of Armenians resided, and ordered the genocide in large part to prevent this eventuality. The genocide was intended to permanently eliminate any possibility that Armenians could achieve autonomy or independence in the empire's eastern provinces. Ottoman records show the government aimed to reduce Armenians to no more than 5% of the local population in the sources of deportation and 10% in the destination areas. This goal could not be accomplished without mass murder. Historians Taner Akam and Umit Kurt agree that the Republic of Turkey and its legal system were built in a sense on the seizure of Armenian cultural, social and economic wealth and on the removal of the Armenian presence. The proceeds from the sale of confiscated property were often used to fund the deportation of Armenians and the resettlement of Muslims, as well for army, militia and other government spending. Ultimately, this formed much of the basis for the industry and the economy of the post-1923 Republic, endowing it with capital. The dispossession and exile of Armenian competitors enabled many lower-class Turks to rise to the middle class. Confiscation of Armenian assets continued into the second half of the 20th century. Following the end of World War I, Allied governments championed the prosecution of war criminals. Grand Vizier Damat Ferid Pasha publicly recognized that 800,000 Ottoman citizens of Armenian origin had died as a result of state policy, and stated that humanity civilizations are shuddering and forever will shudder in the face of the tragedy. The post-war Ottoman government held the Ottoman Special Military Tribunal, by which it sought to pin the Armenian genocide onto the CUP leadership while exonerating the Ottoman Empire as a whole, therefore avoiding partition by the Allies. The court ruled that the crime of mass murder of Armenians was organized and carried out by the top leaders of the CUP. 18 perpetrators were sentenced to death, of only 3 were ultimately executed, and the remainder had fled. The 1920 Treaty of Sèvres, which awarded Armenia a large area in eastern Anatolia, eliminated the Ottoman government's purpose for holding trials. Prosecution was hampered by a widespread belief among Turkish Muslims that the actions against the Armenians were not punishable crimes. Increasingly, the crimes were considered necessary and justified to establish a Turkic nation state. The CUP regrouped as a Turkish nationalist movement to fight the Turkish War of Independence, which we're going to go on to in a sec, relying on the support of the perpetrators of the genocide and those who have profited from it. This movement saw the return of Armenian survivors as a mortal threat to its nationalist ambitions and the interests of its supporters. The return return of survivors was therefore impossible in most of Anatolia, and thousands of Armenians who tried to go there were murdered. The victorious nationalists subsequently declared the Republic of Turkey in 1923. CUP war criminals were granted immunity, and later that year the Treaty of Lausanne established Turkey's current borders and provided for the Greek population's expulsion. Its minority protection provisions had no enforcement mechanism and were disregarded in practice. In Germany, the Nazis viewed post-1923 Turkey as a post-genocidal paradise, and according to the historian Stefan Ilrig, incorporated the Armenian Genocide and its lessons, tactics and benefits into their own worldview. So sadly, the precedent set here by the perpetrators of the Armenian Genocide, and actually the Ottoman government not taking any responsibility and throwing it all on this one group of people, actually would happen in World War II. It happened in Japan, where various charged war criminals would be let off, where Emperor Hirohito would remain the Emperor of Japan. It just seems like to play out all the time, where the victims of genocide or never get justice because geopolitical factors mean the top people always get off. And like I said there, the Turks really didn't have any interest in prosecuting these CUP members, especially once the Armenians had gained their own territory. But yeah, just like Nazi Germany, a lot of the wealth of the Turkish Republic was actually stolen from the Armenian people, just like how a lot of the Nazi wealth was stolen from the Jewish communities in Germany and Central Europe. Now, I mentioned the Turkish War of Independence, and I think an important facet of this, and why Turks are actually pretty butthurt about all of this, and something I actually thought was part of the Armenian Genocide, but apparently technically isn't, is the Greco-Turk War that started in 1919. And this war is just like completely brutal. And we talked about it a tiny bit when I made my video on Golden Dawn. Basically, after the war, the Greek monarchists wanted to restore the old Roman emperor, the Byzantine Empire. They wanted to combine the old pagan empire of ancient Greece with the Byzantine Empire, and they sought to retake this, especially because the Ottoman Empire was in shambles. They were backed by the British, while the Ottomans and the Turks were backed by France and the Soviet Union, who sold them weapons. And this war was completely brutal because the Turks used it as justification to do more massacres against Armenians and Greeks and other Orthodox Christian groups within the territory that was the Ottoman Empire. And then the Greeks, although not on the same scale, used all this to massacre loads of Muslim groups they came across. Now, honestly, if you read anything about this conflict on both sides, it is just so awful to read. But the clear through line is that it is an extension of the policies used against the Armenians in World War I, which they use in the Greco-Turkish War. But why a lot of these Turks get butthurt is because the Greeks also did their own massacres. They act like it's somehow justified because the Greeks were coming to invade Turkey. A lot of Greek nationalists had designs on retaking Istanbul and making it the capital of a new Greek Byzantine Empire, so they act like the actions against the Armenians were justified because they'd always treated them with suspicion. And then after World War I, they have a Greek invading army come in to retake Turkey. What's actually even more interesting about that is, although there was a small Armenian resistance, most Armenian communities did not resist, and people who even marched to their deaths and knew they were going to die, they didn't resist because they didn't want their families to be further punished. And when you read about this stuff, it's really admirable because they knew they were going to die, a lot of these people, and the Turkish stuff about them all being insurgents for Russia was complete fabrication, and they still chose to die rather than having the rest of their families killed in certain circumstances. But of course, a lot of the times the Turks just slaughtered whole communities and whole families. But this whole chapter of history is insanely bloody, and it's something you don't really learn about because it's like, well, you have World War I is over, what happens after World War I, or what happened in the Ottoman Empire during World War I? You don't actually really learn about that stuff. It's the same with like the British actions in the Middle East after World War I as well, against the Iraqis and stuff like that. Well, you never learn about it. So it's not surprising a lot of people are insanely ignorant about this. But of course, because this is part of Turkey's founding identity and foundation story, it is completely whitewashed for them, and that often amounts to total genocide denial. So I hope with this section of the video, you've got a little look into why Turks are so sensitive about it and how in their mind they can often downplay the genocide because of events that happened after World War I, including the Greco-Turk War. So before we get back to films that are about the Armenian Genocide, I read a really good CNN article back from 2015, which talked about more like contemporary Turkey and their views towards the Armenian Genocide, which I'm just going to share with you now. So by Christina Asquith and Audrey Pence, why Turkey won't say the G word when it comes to Armenians. There are several reasons why Turkey maintains its position on the issue. Turks say that to most people, the term genocide is associated with the Nazis, not the beloved founders of modern Turkey like Kemal Ataturk. Last year, the Turkish government expressed condolences to Armenians and accepted that hundreds of thousands of their ancestors died as they were marched out of towns and cities in central and eastern Anatolia in the waning years of the Ottoman Empire, but the government called it necessary deportation during the messy and violent period of transition leading up to World War I, when many Armenian radicals were threatening to side with Russia. Again, this issue is massively overblown. Turkey says that there was never a deliberate ethnically driven effort to exterminate the Armenian population. It was a wartime precaution like the US relocating the Japanese population during World War II. Like that makes it any better, says Dr. Kamer Kasim, Dean of Abant Izit Basau University. Kasim dismisses the drive for the genocide label as little more than propaganda campaign being waged by the Armenian diaspora. Politics and timing is another issue. At a time when Erdogan is in full campaign mode ahead of upcoming elections, he's attempting to assuage concerns about unemployment and slowed growth by drumming up nationalists further with promises of a new Turkey akin to the glory days of the Ottoman Empire. It's hardly the time to label the country's founders as murderers. In the same way American schools whitewash the history of US settlers and their relations with Native Americans, Turkish schools have long taken an airbrush to the Young Turks. The movement, which began in 1908, was compromise of the army officers who were in power as the country transitioned from the hands of spoiled sultans to Kemal Ataturk, the much adored leader who came to power in 1923 and is credited with founding the modern Turkish state. Calling the events of 1915 a genocide would undermine the very narratives that Turks hold dear, says Berku Goltekin Hunzman, a senior analyst at Ankara Policy Center who has studied Turkish-Armenian relations for a decade. She says the country simply isn't ready to dismantle the foundation it was built on or stain the legacy of its founders. Turkey is still too young and too insecure to rewrite its history and question the events unfolding at the establishment of the Republic. So the article was kind of like saying, trying to get most Turks to admit Ataturk and other Turks involved in the genocide were these genocidal killers who put into practice this policy of ethnically cleansing Armenians primarily, among other groups as well. It's basically like trying to get an American in, I guess, I don't know, 1880 to admit most of the founding fathers were rapist slave owners, and America was built on native genocide and African slavery, and the foundation of America is inherently built on mass killings. Most Turks do not believe a genocide occurred. At best, a lot of them believe there was some sort of mass killing, but like it said there with the university professor, that a lot of them believe it's like a necessary step, like Germans and primarily Japanese people being sent to detention camps during World War II in the United States. So this battle over the history of the Armenian genocide by the Turkish side and by many people who side with the Armenians has actually played out with films, and like I said earlier, Oscar Isaac is actually a part of this as well. So there were two films that came out in 2017 about the Armenian genocide. One was called The Promise with Oscar Isaac, and one was called The Ottoman Lieutenant, which starred Josh Hartnett. So a really good article by The Hollywood Reporter delves into why these two films coming out at the same time, depicting the same event in history, have really different political views on what actually happened. So The Promise versus The Ottoman Lieutenant, two movies battle over the Armenian genocide by The Hollywood Reporter staff. The similarities between The Ottoman Lieutenant, which opened March 20th, and The Promise, which arrives in theatres Friday, may be more than just a coincidence. In fact, the filmmakers behind The Promise charge that The Ottoman Lieutenant may be part of Turkish efforts to deny that the Armenian genocide took place. The Promise, starring Oscar Isaac and Christian Bale and directed by Hotel Rwanda's Terry George, is the more high-profile of the two features, having received major marketing in recent weeks, whereas The Promise lays the blame of the Armenian genocide squarely at the feet of the Ottoman government, a fact acknowledged by most historians. The Ottoman Lieutenant offers a more revisionist viewpoint. While the film acknowledges that massacres took place, it blames rogue groups of war-ravaged soldiers, presenting the mass killing as an unfortunate consequence of the hostilities and not something ordered from up top. In fact, the film's dashing protagonist, a Turkish soldier, ultimately puts his life on the line to save a group of Armenian villagers. The revisionist interpretation is also the official position of the Turkish government, which has for the past 100 years denied that any genocide took place, and so the creators of The Promise believe the Ottoman lieutenant was produced not only in an attempt to blunt some of the impact of their film, but they also suspect and are alleging that there may be links between the film and the government of Erdogan, who on April 16th won a controversial referendum granting him expanded powers. Mike Medavoy, another of The Promise's producers, took it a step further at the film's New York premiere earlier this week, alleging that Bilal Erdogan, the 35-year-old son of the Turkish president, had a hand in financing the Ottoman lieutenant. What's interesting to me is that they felt they needed to make this counter-political argument. To explain the Ottoman lieutenant's possible connection to the Turkish government, Carla Garapedian, an associate producer on The Promise who works for a non-profit Armenian Film Foundation, first points to a discovery made by the organization called Project Save, a Massachusetts-based archive of old Armenian photos. Contacted by the Ottoman lieutenant's producers asking to license some of the images, the curator made some inquiries. He found that the production was Turkish financed, says Garpedian. Project Save ultimately declined to license the photos. Bilal Erdogan is believed to have business ties outside the film industry with Yusuf Ezenkul, the founder of Eastern Sunrise Film and also a producer on The Ottoman Lieutenant. Ezenkul also is a producer of Vilinta, a Turkish soap opera that aired between 2014 and 2016 and is believed to be one of the most expensive series on local TV. Erdogan and his wife have actually visited the set. His work often downplays some of the most notorious periods of bloodshed in Turkish history. It's not clear what role he may have played in shaping The Ottoman Lieutenant. He didn't respond to our queries, nor did others in the creative team, including the US-based producer Stephen Brown. So of course we don't know for certain if the Ottoman lieutenant was actually funded by people associated with Erdogan's regime, but it does seem pretty curious that a film starring like a B-tier actor like Josh Hartnett and having like a little cameo from Ben Kingsley to probably sell it was competing against a film starring Oscar Isaac, and this was in 2017, and more notably Christian Bale, which obviously would have more appeal based on the people involved. You can't be sure of what happened, but you can be sure that the Ottoman lieutenant was pushing a political agenda that was more in line with the Turkish government, where The Promise was more in line with what most historians say about the Armenian genocide. But very, very interesting there. So what I wanted to end on with this video is talk about why countries don't acknowledge the Armenian genocide. Now, last year, Joe Biden finally did acknowledge the Armenian genocide. And you can really see this from like multiple points of view. With the US, I'm always cynical, like why couldn't you acknowledge it before? But of course, the US-Turkish relationship has been pretty frosty since Donald Trump was in office and they bought weapons from Russia, and they seem to be getting closer aligned with Russia despite being a key NATO member for the US. Of course, Armenians have constantly lobbied in America to get recognized. Both parties have said they would recognize it, but both parties' presidents have not done that. So just reading an article from The Guardian which talked about why the US hasn't done this. So Joe Biden's declaration marked the culmination of decades of lobbying by Armenian American organizations. This is a critically important moment in defense of our human rights, said Brian Adurny, head of the Armenian Assembly of America. It's been a long journey. President Biden is standing firm against a century of denial and is charting a course for human rights everywhere. Ronald Reagan referred to the Armenian genocide in passing in a statement on the Holocaust in 1981, but was not followed by a formal recognition. Barack Obama promised Armenian Americans he would take that step, but reneged once in office, unwilling to upset an ally. In 2019, both chambers of Congress declared their own recognition despite Donald Trump's efforts to stop them. Sona Hagapte, a Turkish political scientist, said the Biden declaration would be a seminal moment in relations between Ankara and Washington, but said economic considerations may force Erdogan to downplay the impact of an issue he previously considered an attempt to undermine the legitimacy of the modern Turkish state. What happened in the past was as soon as those presidents took office, departments of government would brief them. That's not happening now, and this is linked to changing US views inside Washington. Now Turkey is one of the most disliked countries, especially at the Pentagon. He said the Turkish decision to purchase the Russian S-400 air system was the main reason for the change in attitude. Policy disputes over the Kurds and the Islamic states have also played a role. Administration officials noted that Biden had sought to soften the impact on relations with Ankara, emphasizing that the genocide was carried out before modern Turkey was born and the focus was not of blame but remembrance. So the US clearly didn't recognize the Armenian genocide, mainly for geopolitical concerns during the Cold War. Like I said, Turkey was a key NATO member, and that's pretty much why they didn't, because Turkey is so central to US foreign policy, not just in terms of Russia, but also the Middle East, Syria, Iran, issues to do with the Kurds and things like that. But there's also like the precedent it sets for these countries. So the UK and Israel are two more that historically have not recognized the genocide and still don't to this day. And why don't these countries do that? Of course, they have geopolitical concerns, but they also have the concerns of, if they recognize the Armenian genocide, if they're going to be consistent, they're going to have to recognize their own genocides and ethnic cleansing, because the British don't recognize a lot of the genocides they did in Africa, in India and other places like that, in Malaysia. And Israel obviously do not recognize a lot of their own massacres. And when I was actually reading a lot of the Armenian stuff, what came to my mind immediately was Israeli settlers and taking Palestinian property, and Palestinian property being given by the Israeli government to new settlers who recently came into the country. And it's so similar. It's no wonder that these countries do not recognize the genocide, because if they start recognizing the Armenian genocide, they're going to have to start recognizing their own massacres and genocides throughout their own history. So again, not very surprising that settler colonial nations like America and Israel and colonial nations like the UK do not recognize something that they are also very guilty of. Reading this stuff makes me sad, because so many Armenians had to wait so long to actually get a massive country like the United States, you know, the key leading figure supposedly on human rights, to recognize there was a genocide done against them by Turkey. And the only reason they didn't recognize it was just for pure politics. It wasn't anything about ethics. It was just because they didn't want to annoy the Turks. And this always happens. Like I said, the Japanese largely got away with what they did because the US needed them for the Cold War. So Japan really hasn't reconciled with its own past, and like the rape of Nanking and things like that. The same with countries like Greece, where most people who collaborated and did the Holocaust and killed nearly every Greek Jew in Greece actually got let off, and many of them got put in the post-war Greek government. No justice was served for the victims of the Holocaust in Greece, and this happens throughout the world. And it really depresses you and blackpills you and makes you a doomer, because you realize that people who do this stuff always get away with it no matter what. And in modern times, it's happened in places like Serbia and various African and Middle Eastern countries as well, because there's always someone who's going to back you up. There's always a geopolitical ally who will not sell you out, who will find some use for you, who will hide you away, and you largely will not face repercussions. And this, of course, goes back to World War II, where people who were literally involved in the SS, people who worked on the SS's like rocket program using slave labor, working them to death, got rewarded for their efforts in the war, where they made weapons to bomb British civilians, by being put into NASA and working on their space program and never facing any consequences. And sadly, that is the world we live in. Whether it is the Holocaust or the Armenian Genocide or the various genocides perpetrated by the European colonial powers, there is hardly any justice for these things because of geopolitics. Anyway, that is it for the video. Let me know what you guys think down in the comments. Follow me on social media at the Kavernacle. Support my work on Patreon. Come join our community on my subreddit. And if you made it this far, thank you all for watching. Thank you all for sticking through my Spain video journey. Sadly, this is the last video I'm making here. Back to normal this week, I think. I'm going to make a video on Friday. Chocolate oranges are back. Old set is back. Hopefully no more dogs barking and construction at weird hours of the night, and we will get back to normal, and we will be live streaming again 2 times a week, just like I used to. So hope you guys are all ready for that to come back, and just thank you for watching this video.